Troy University's Quality Enhancement Plan is creating a culture of reading with the goal of improving student learning through intensively improving reading skills. The 5-year plan includes the Common Reading Initiative, the College Reading Initiative, and the Faculty Development Initiative. In the following roundtable discussion, Troy faculty members discuss techniques and practices they use to create a culture of reading.
Hello and welcome to this roundtable discussion provided by our Quality Enhancement Program, or QEP, on engaged reading. I'm Elaine Bassett and I'll moderate today's session, and I'm very pleased to be sitting here with these people. Let me introduce you first to the people on our panel. To my right is Teresa Johnson from the English Department. This is Kurt Kernut, also from the English Department. Shannon Carolipio from eTroy, Kimber Wickersham from the Social Work Department, and Allison Hughes, who works with our adaptive needs students in the Office of Student Development. These roundtable discussions that we've had have been focusing on engaged reading and getting our students engaged in this culture of reading. Today's panel is going to take that just maybe one step further, because each of the people at our table today has a specialty, a certain population of students that they work with often, and we're going to bring in discussion about those student populations and how we can best reach those who aren't that non-traditional, or those who are the non-traditional, who aren't the usual 18 or 19-year-old. Before we get into that, though, let's talk just a little bit about what engaged reading actually is. What do you see? When you hear that phrase, what do you think? And do you think it's something that's still necessary in a university education? Teresa, you want to start us?
Yes, engaged reading is very necessary. Many of our students come to us, such as the international students, and I know you represent different populations, and engagement is so important in order for the student to learn. And engagement can be taught. If these students have not learned how to become engaged or how to tap into those metacognitive skills, we can teach that through modeling and also in many other ways of engagement. Interaction is very important. Having them respond in journals and just teaching them to self-assess. Because otherwise, if they have not read the material and become engaged with it, they're not going to be able to write the essays that we require or to pass the test.
Right.
So it's very important.
Yeah. Kirk, what do you see? How would you define engaged reading?
I come at it as the idea that part of what we're also teaching is the pleasure of reading. We're trying to convey the fact that this isn't just an exercise, but there is enjoyment in reading. Learning is fun. And so we spend a lot of time, I think, talking about why read in the first place. And the idea is, I think, that if you begin to feel like this is something more than a learning exercise, that the learning can go on, but I can also derive pleasure from it, it's an activity that's more likely to go on after the assignments are done or after the degree is granted. So we really try to emphasize the pleasures of reading.
Yeah, it is nice when our students become lifelong learners because they want to be, because they enjoy what they're reading. What about social work, Kimber?
Well, in social work, we have evidence-based practice, which means that in order to come up with a solution, you have to read and determine what's out there to begin with. And one of the things with the military learners that I think is helpful, we actually go into the journals, we actually delve into solving the problem, and that language is sometimes not as frightening when you come from a background of jobs where everything is in its own place, and the transition, bringing in journals and then bringing in the text and actually putting them into place with issues that you are facing right then, it gives them a vested interest and it encourages reading.
So when they see the purpose in it and they're able to work within that purpose.
Yes.
Good. All right. Allison, what do you think? I know that you teach our orientation classes, the Troy 1101, but you work with many, many students on this campus. What role do you think reading plays in their education and in their coursework?
Reading plays a huge part in their coursework. The problem with some of our students within the adaptive needs program, they come to college with a diagnosed disability, a learning disability, attention deficit, and they don't really know how to be engaged. They possibly were not engaged before coming to college. So they tend to be a little sometimes defensive, may be a good word, because they don't always understand. And so having them learn more about how to be engaged, learning that reading is fun and that this is something that will carry on is always, always important with them.
Yeah.
I think really when we're talking about fun and really engaging reading and taking pleasure in it, so many students, even in the online environment, we have such a diverse student population there. Most of them really tend to approach reading as a chore. Like I can't believe that I have to do this. And so really, I think one of the key facets in encouraging, promoting reading skills is to have students form relationships with the text, whatever text it may be. It's not always Match.com, but it's really preferences, interests, getting the subject matter that students are going to be vested in, that they can apply to real world situations, or that they can apply to themselves, their relationships with others. And I think once we have that kind of connection that's made, forming the relationships between those different aspects of everyday life, then it really kind of promotes understanding and retaining the information that we're trying to get them to absorb.
You're talking about getting students used to always having, in a sense, books in their possession. And I think one of the things I try to tell mine is that they're so much luckier than we were, because with all the e-readers and all the technology, books really are so portable, much more so than they were in the day where we had to lug hardbacks all over a campus. And so I think it's kind of fun to teach them to be able to incorporate the technology into their reading. And I always encourage mine to download whatever kind of e-reader they can get on their phones, and to use all this technology. It's out there, it's advantageous, and it creates that idea that we should never be without a book in our possession.
And really, a lot of times, the books, it's not always static. The words on the page. One of the things that I used to do is, I like to have the book in my hand, and I would write little notes in the margin. It was mine. It was my book. And even with the e-readers now, you still have that same capability. So it's not just this one-dimensional, thing that's right there in front of you. There's so many ways to, form your thoughts, to look, kind of jump into the book. As long as you have the right material, the right approach to encouraging students to do that. It really helps.
I agree, and I believe that explicit instruction on annotating a text is necessary, not only for our international students who may have to look up an expression or vocabulary word even, but for our traditional American students, because many of them have come out of the classroom context where they have been forbidden to mark in a book. And that's one of the first things that I do in first year composition and world literature. Let's go to the opening paragraph. Let's underline, circle, look for the symbols, establish the allusions, and make notes within that text. And I think that is important in the beginning of engagement.
I think it's very clear that we're all readers and that we enjoy reading. You know, we do get into the text, and yes, I'm an underliner and I write in the margins, and because when I read a book, I'm in it, you know, and I think we feel this way, and we would love to have that for our students. That doesn't always work, does it? No. It's very difficult sometimes to transfer that passion for reading to our students. And some of our students have such particular issues or challenges that we have to sort of approach them in a different way. For example, the international student. How do we get that student who's working with understanding the language as well as all of this underneath the words, you know, how do we do that? That would seem to me to be a great challenge for international students.
Yes.
What do we do? How can we work with those students?
To begin with, I think it's important that we establish background. We must give that student the conceptual framework that the student needs in order to approach the text, because so many times there is a mismatch. Do you see, if they don't realize when the story was published, the social background, the social context, or they might not readily recognize the archetypes, do you see, that the author is using? And for sure, they do not always understand our symbols in English literature. They're quite the opposite as far as color symbolism, crossing the many cultures. And so we have to establish the predominant symbols, the predominant allusions. They do not know those. Also the language. If a writer uses slang, that is like another language within the language. And so we have to provide all of that background before these students may become engaged. And I feel that that happens with the introduction to the text and with the questioning, the think alouds that we can do as instructors while modeling, and then asking thought-provoking questions, trying to establish, have you ever experienced something similar in your culture? You know, when you think about literature, we have heroes and we have quests, we have searches for identity. And so once we hit upon those main themes and then we establish that background, I think then those students will start to think, oh yeah, this is similar. And then we can begin the true engagement.
There's really elements of it that transcends culture.
Exactly. Exactly. And we have to search for those, and we have to establish those.
Right.
Exactly.
Let me change directions just a little bit, and Kirk and Kimber, you teach a good many adult students, and I think the assumption is, you know, all of us over a certain age grew up reading, so we love it. Is that what you find with your adult students or with your military students?
No, actually reading scares them sometimes. They're used to the what you have to do at work, what you have to do they've gotten away from school. School is a little bit challenging for them because it's been some years. One of the things that we try to do, especially because of my field in social work, we try to encourage them to get articles and things out of their local newspaper, offline. Thank goodness for online, they're able to access journals that they might not be able to otherwise. Exactly. And that transitions them into the text. But there again, you have to relate it to something that they already know. And so this way they're able to bring in the issues of what they're already concerned about and why they got into social work in the first place, and able to bring in those different viewpoints. Because when we're next to Fort Benning, but they didn't start out at Fort Benning. They come from everywhere, and they have different viewpoints. And so that's one of the things as we go up the hierarchy of the classes and they're able to think more on their own, they're able to bring those opinions in, and they have to bring in articles, and they have to bring in writings to back those up. And so when you tie those together, they're more comfortable with reading. And as you increase that comfort zone, then they'll increase their reading on their own.
You know, I think the issue of confidence is precisely one of the biggest obstacles that adult learners face, the notion of, you know, there's this world of knowledge out there, but I'm just humble little old me and I can't really do this, and I just need to know what I need to know in order to get to the next level. And I think part of what we have to teach in terms of reading is that there's no text out there that can't be made sense of. We got to figure out how to make sense of it. That's the challenge. So it's a question of interpretation. And it even boils down to the basic level sometimes of vocabulary, where students will run into words that they don't use, that they're unfamiliar with, and there's this notion of, that's not a word that I should have access to. I don't need to know it, and I certainly don't need to use it. And so part of what we try to teach is that there's, again, a fun or a pleasure in learning about words. Doesn't mean you have to incorporate it into everyday speech, but that, you know, that no word is off limits, and that you can know these. So we do things like getting them to, you know, keep vocabulary lists, and we try to make it fun in a way that it doesn't feel remedial, because there's an assumption for many of them that the vocabulary is remedial. The other issue we face is kind of a over-specialization of society, to where these students coming in from a professional angle are really resistant, especially at the general studies level, to the more broader humanities approach. And it's kind of like, okay, I know this is a required class, and I got to take this, fill in the blank. But, you know, what good is it? What is it going to do me? And again, what you really have to do is, as a teacher, sell the notion of that there is no reading experience that is not valuable. You know, I can take the stupidest book on the face of the earth, but by interpreting it, I can create knowledge out of it. And applying that knowledge, it becomes useful in some way. So what we're teaching is, for a culture that is in many ways over-emphasizing the utilitarianness of it, or the utility of all knowledge, the practical applications. We do have to sell that, and we have to make it clear that, you know, that yes, our nice sort of metaphorical goal is to make everybody real well-rounded, but we understand that for many of you there's a in the trenches sort of need to make this useful. And so we're going to show you how that's useful.
Right.
I have said before in world literature, okay, you need to know this so that you'll be able to carry on a conversation at a dinner party. If it has to be useful for you, you must know. Because if someone makes a reference to Achilles and you do not know, oh, how embarrassing would that be?
I wonder if it would be. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think, Shannon, the students that you work with have maybe their own particular challenge, or at least maybe teachers of online students have a particular challenge. How do you motivate those students you can't see face to face?
Well, I would definitely say employing a text-based reading strategy online can be inherently challenging for faculty members because, you know, you're trying to engage them by reading without putting them off by the fact that they have to read. And so when you think about it, your primary mode of communication is going to be reading, whether it's an email, whether it's an announcement in Blackboard, whether it's, you know, you have your lecture notes, having the transcripts for the ADA students, or you know, trying to work around military students, you know, just busy, hectic schedules, and just trying, you know, to serve such a diverse group of students. You know, we have first-year students. We've got people who waited, and I teach preparatory English, so I have students who may have waited until their sophomore, junior year. So one of the biggest things I do to encourage students, I think, is to try to bring with it that enthusiasm. You know, as an avid reader, I have my favorites. You know, I try to bring humor. So we try to encourage instructors to you know, branch out, to use a variety of the resources at their disposal, whether it's the online journals or whether it's some of the things we have from our NBS textbook providers. We have the YouTube videos. All of these things can be used to help get students interested in the reading process. And by connecting these real-world issues, by connecting, you know, things that are just timeless, these themes and issues that you brought up earlier, the archetypes, you know, it connects with us all on some level anyway. So getting students to you know, realize that to begin with, it really kind of helps broach that barrier. So I think that those are some of the main things.
Well, Allison, what if we have a student who really is interested and enjoys reading and wants to be engaged, to use our word, but that student has some sort of learning difficulty? How do we go about helping that student?
One thing that I have found and I've seen that has helped students is as they're reading, as you said before, to discuss the introduction of it, where it was written, who wrote it. And once they know that, they feel a little more comfortable with it. And writing in the margins is very, very helpful, because then they remember what you said. They remember what was discussed in class. They may not exactly remember reading it, but they know what was said. Because many of our students come in and say, this book is so many pages long. That's all they see. It is 200 pages long. They want me to read this book. And when we have to break it back down, no, we're not talking about 200 pages. We're just talking about this paragraph, this page, these 2 pages, and let's stop. Let's talk about it. Let's see what you read. Let's see what you remember. And then if they don't remember a lot, let's go back. And now I know through our program and in different programs, there's so much assistive technology that will actually read to them. And so they can buy the book. I know I've actually read and recorded it on just a little audio tape, and they went through their English book or their literature book and have listened to the tapes, or they listen to the CDs, and they read along with it. So in that, they hear it so they understand, but then they're learning to read. They're learning to read, and then, because sometimes they say, I tried to go ahead and read. I tried to do a few things. So I think it is that, just kind of stopping, where are we at? You know, some of the instructors I know will say, read this for homework, and then the next day give a pop quiz, just to see where they're at. So longer stories, longer chapters, break it down, just to see how much they've absorbed and how much they've understood from that.
How do you all measure whether or not they've read and understood? What do you do in your classes to
I have a
make sure?
reader response journal, just 3/4 of a page, just respond. And it could be a personal response. Sometimes I get a summary, and that's all. But it is a response. And also from that, we know if they got the gist of it, or if we need to build some background, if they totally missed the point or the theme.
You know, one of the things we always run into, and it's kind of I think it's in some ways a barrier to that next cognitive level, is the idea of personal response. And especially in the humanities, the first reaction is always, did I like this or did I not like this? And that usually determines the next level that the student is willing to go. So one of the things that we try to teach is that personal response might be an immediate reaction, but it's the first one. And where can we go with this next? I think I think in all of these issues, what really has to happen is we as instructors have to reflect on the sort of the pedagogy of reading, or how we are approaching it ourselves, and we have to, in a sense, always emphasize the meta quality of reading. I always talk to my students about my own reading habits, which are by no means perfect. And I think that in some ways humanizes the idea that it is a process, and that all of these issues of time and comprehension and the difference between summary and analysis, they're all issues that we struggle with ourselves as we're trying to do something with whatever data we're confronted with.
Right.
So.
I think that's a really big point, is the difference between students reading and summarizing and thinking that they have actually made some great observation about it, when in actuality it's really regurgitating the information that is there. They're not interacting with the text when they do that. So being able to help students understand the difference between that kind of just base interaction with it, and then to the next level where you're providing thoughtful responses. And I use the reader response journals as well. It can be anything from newspaper articles to short stories. And it's really interesting to see the varied responses that I do get from students, and from term to term. So many people in there, they can be thought-provoking, and students, they love them and then they hate them, but it doesn't matter which part of the spectrum it's at, as long as it provokes that emotion, then I think that's helping students realize that this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm not just supposed to take this at face value. I'm supposed to question it.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
We do, a lot of times we'll do vignettes. And after the course material's been read, or whatever they've been asked to read or to find on their own and read, then I'll give them a case study. I'll give them a vignette, and they have to try to pull out of that and put into place the information they've read.
Right.
And coming from a military strict situation, we plug in that strict reading time, because it is something that tends to go to the back burner. I don't have time for that right now. I need to do this. Okay, well now you need to read this. You have this set criteria for this week, but then to make sure they understand it, try to give them a situation, and then that pulls in the vocabulary, that pulls in the comprehension, if they can put that into place.
And I will also say, from the university orientation, the Troy 1101 perspective, the common reader, they come in and go, you want me to read this book? What do I have to read? And, we discuss it, and we go through. One thing that I've noticed that has really helped my particular classes was, I wanted them to read the book, but also then we talked about themes. And I said, I want you to pick a theme out of the book. I said, it may be one that we've discussed, then it may be something else. But write maybe just something small about how it's maybe a similarity to your life, how you've experienced something similar, or has this ever happened to you? And even the students who were resistant to reading and may have said, I didn't like the book, they have written some really good papers, and you could tell that they actually thought about the book and what happened, and then how it worked in their life. And so that way you knew they were reading something.
Exactly.
So they thought.
Good.
Yeah. If we can get them to sit in the author's chair, then the engaged reader can analyze. But getting them to that spot is our job.
Yes.
And it is sometimes overwhelming.
Yes.
But it is a process.
It is. Now, as I've listened to you talk, I've learned a lot that I'm excited to use. Some of the things, just to sum up, we model our own reading for students, right? We try to create a connection of some sort so that they can become involved with it. We encourage them, and later we teach it to them as a discipline. This is something you have to make time for. And then we want finally for them to think about it. Once I think they're thinking about what they've read, they're engaged. You know,
Exactly.
right? Any last remarks, any last thoughts that you'd like to leave for anybody who is watching our discussion today? Just keep doing what you're doing, right? You know,
Make
plug
it
in
fun.
as much as possible. That works every time, doesn't it?
And
And I think-
everybody can do it.
Yeah,
Yes,
Everyone can do it.
yes.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think we're all passionate about what we teach.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we take that passion into the classroom and make our heroes real,
That works.
that works.
Good. Thank you all so much for being with us today and for sharing your wisdom, your experience. And we thank you for joining us. We hope you'll join us on another of our roundtable discussions.
To learn more about Troy's Quality Enhancement Plan, visit troy.edu. Details on the Quality Enhancement Plan can be found by clicking on Current Students and looking under Student Resources.